Hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Linus. I've been asked today to talk about how to build an innovative work culture. So, thinking about that, I started to look back for the common themes throughout my own career and try to find out what are the commonalities between those organizations and teams where I can see that they have been the most innovative. So that has been the common thread throughout this presentation. I want to talk about three things really. What are my own experiences with regards to innovative teams and organizations? What do we mean by innovation? And is innovation different from invention? And why does it matter? And finally, what are the most important factors when creating and driving an innovative culture in the workplace? So, personally, I started my career working for two very technology-driven companies based on quite fantastic inventions. Challenge we had with those companies were that although they were great from a technology perspective and people were extremely driven, we didn't necessarily manage to transfer those inventions into true innovations. So I would come back to what the difference between an invention and innovation is in a few minutes. I then did a couple of years at Ericsson. At Ericsson, you compete in a cutthroat market, and the only chance was to be faster, smaller, and cheaper than our competition. And I got to see what innovation could look like inside large organizations, and also sometimes what it should not look like, of course. After that, I was the CEO of a small Silicon IP startup. And when you run a small company out of Sweden, we were 10 to 20 people at that point in time. You're not a proven technology, you're not a proven brand. So not only do you have to be better, but you actually also have to be able to communicate to your customers in a succinct way why you are better. And actually then, of course, deliver on that promise. So what we did back then was then later acquired by ARM, the company making all the processor in your cell phones, your PDAs, etc., etc. And ARM was a fantastic example of a company that is, in its core, driven by innovation. So for the first 10 to 15 years of my career, I finally realized that what's triggered me so far was actually innovation. And have the opportunity to work with things that were not already defined. So after a couple of years at ARM, I took the role as Director of Innovation at the biggest university in Scandinavia, Lund University. So I ran a team where we were responsible for both innovation and investments. So we were evaluating maybe 300-400 companies or ideas from researchers and students every year. That resulted in maybe 100 innovation projects, starting maybe, or helping to start maybe 20, 30 companies per year and investing in 10 of those. With that mass of ideas and people, you start to realize what actually makes the difference between a successful project and a less successful project. And the idea and the technology is one component, but in reality, it's all about the people and what drives those people and what qualities you can build within a team. And now for the last couple of years, I am the general partner and managing director of an investment fund, focusing on seed and Series A investments into technology and life science companies from Scandinavia. So looking back, I would say that the two common threads throughout my own career that relates to innovation is one, of course, about myself, what drives me, what do I enjoy, when do I have the most fun. And the other one is, what are the traits and qualities in the people and teams that are actually most successful and most innovative? And when you think about it, I would say that the one thing that stands out is actually their engagement. How much do they care about what they do? And how much do they care about each other? And how much do they care about succeeding? And I think you can ask any person working professionally with investing into startups and scale-ups, and you ask them, would you rather invest in a fantastic idea with a mediocre team or a mediocre idea with a fantastic team? And all of them would every day invest in the team rather than the idea. So, taking a step further and looking at innovation. What do we mean by innovation? Is an innovation the same thing as an invention? If not, what's the difference? An invention, that is when you come up with something new. An idea, a new way to look at things, a new way to do things. So it's new. An innovation, it's something new, but it's not enough. It's something new, an invention, that actually creates a value to other people and organizations. So an innovation actually has a value in the marketplace. And when you think about creating an innovative culture in your organization, I think you have to keep that in mind. So it's not only about doing new things, it's about doing new things that matter and matter to your customers. So just to exemplify this, and going back to my own background when I was a student in engineering physics, this equation probably does not make sense to a lot of you, and to be honest, it didn't really make sense to me either. I don't think I ever really understood it. But if you look back about 100 years and you look at physics was basically a done deal in the early 1900s. It was all solved. You had the Newton mechanics, we had the Maxwell equations. There was just this little calculation error in black body radiation that everybody thought it was just going to be ironed out. There were a small group of people, Schrödinger among them. Other people were like Einstein and Heisenberg and some other people. They started to dig into that little calculation error, and they realized that there was much bigger issues around it. And that laid a foundation for quantum physics and everything that came with that. And it turned physics completely upside down. This was in the 1920s. Fantastic invention, fantastic research. It was a Nobel Prize awarded a couple of years later, of course. Was this an innovation? Not at all. It didn't make any difference to anybody outside a few academic institutions. If we go forward maybe 20-25 years, this is the first transistor coming out of Bell Labs in the early 1940s. This was most probably the first time that the understanding of quantum mechanics made a difference in the real world or the world outside of academia. And of course, the transistor being developed at Bell Labs in the 40s was the foundation for the whole digital revolution, and of course, what we have today, with examples such as AI, etc. So when you think about this, what are the conclusions that you could draw? One is invention and innovation are two different things. Secondly, it's unpredictable. I don't think anybody in any way could foresee how the findings of Schrödinger in the 1920s would translate into the digital revolution that we've seen for the last 40 years. And thirdly, it takes time. So, innovation, why is it important? Why does it matter? I mean, as an organization, as a company, you have your products, you have your customers, you're selling, you're most probably successful in what you're doing, otherwise you wouldn't be where you are. Why can't you just continue to do what you did yesterday? And I think a lot of companies have managed to do that for quite a while. And what we're seeing at the moment is that the pace of technological change is just increasing faster and faster and faster. And these cycles become shorter and shorter and shorter. And if you look back at the most successful companies in the world around 1920, and if you look at who they were 30 or 40 or 50 years later, they were mostly the same. But if you do the same exercise from 1970 to 2020, the majority of them are other companies. So the cycle of innovation, the cycle of sort of destruction and creation is increasing. And the only way to stay on top of that is to drive innovation. And it's about driving real innovation, meaning that you have to allow for it to take time, and you have to allow for it to go in unpredictable directions. So it's less about scheduling innovations 2 hours every Friday, and it's more about building the right culture. So what do we mean by building a culture, and what kind of culture do we need to build? And being an engineer, and I know this is a blank page so far. Being an engineer, I always struggled with trying to quantify how should I be helping my teams to perform, whether they were business teams or engineering teams or whatever they were. And being married to a psychologist, I was always asking my wife, what should I do? Where's the research on exactly what should I do, what should I change, what should I measure, what should I reward in order to create an efficient, innovative team culture? And being a psychologist, of course, her answer was always, well, it depends. So that only helped so far. In 2018, a professor at Harvard named Amy Edmondson published a book called The Fearless Organization. And she managed to, in my view, she managed to put down into words a lot of the findings that I think a lot of managers have seen tacitly throughout their careers, but having a hard time put it into a structured way of working. She published a book called The Fearless Organization, and it's all about creating something she coined as psychological safety, which is the foundation for creating a successful team, a successful organization. The psychological safety then, if you manage to create that within your organization, that one will start to drive key qualities such as performance, collaboration, learning, quality, engagement, etc. And also, probably one of the most important qualities, innovation. So if we just stop here for a second looking at these qualities, a lot of these qualities we have traditionally measured within our teams. We measure and reward their performance. We measure and reward the quality of their delivery. We expect people to be learning, and we measure that. We also started to measure collaboration. What we traditionally have been measuring less has been engagement. So I think one of the findings looking at psychological safety and this whole change in how you drive successful teams is actually to put a harder emphasis on building engagement and actually measuring engagement within our teams to see if we have managed to create the kind of culture that we need, a psychological safety culture. And of course, that then will enable us to also be driving innovation. So, finishing off, if we want to be driving innovation in our organizations, it's not enough saying that it is important. It will not happen because we say it. It will happen if we create the right culture. And that requires numerous building blocks in order to get there. So we need to create the right culture, a culture of psychological safety, with the competence, the drive, the quality, the collaboration, and everything. And personally, I think that if I look back again at all the teams I've been working with and all the companies that I've seen from the outside and how they have performed, I think that, again, engagement is probably the most common theme throughout the successful ones. And if I compare them to the less successful ones. So my conclusion of building an innovative work culture in your organization is to create psychological safety, you couple that with engagement, and then you will actually get the kind of innovation you need. So, with that said, I would like to open up the floor for questions. So I will be ending the slideshow here and see if I can flip back to actually seeing you. Let's see how I do this. Stop sharing. Here we go. Thank you. So if there are questions, let me see if I can get my screen over here so that let's see, here's a Q&A. Common barriers to building an innovative culture. I think the biggest barrier is honestly to allow it to happen. I think from a management perspective, you're pressed for results. You're pressed to do the technical delivery at a certain date, a certain hour, a certain, etc. And doing that, you tend to not allow people to do things that are a little bit outside the scope. And in order to get innovation going, you need to have that allowance to some extent. So I would say it goes back to the psychological safety, actually allowing people to do something that is a bit maybe even awkward or odd. Second question, do you have an example of initiatives that build psychological safety and engagement? Yeah, that's a very good one. I spent some time on this and trying in one of my former jobs on so how do you get there? Because it's easy to say that we have to create psychological safety, but what do we actually mean by that? So I would say that Google, that is arguably one of the most successful companies that we have in the world at the moment. They did some research on what were the most successful teams they have and what were the qualities among this team and how did they work. And that correlated very well to psychological safety. Then they went a bit further and looked at what kind of behaviors did those teams have. And they're listed, I think there are 7 of them. And I think one that goes again as the common thread throughout those 7 is that assume good intentions. What that means in the workplace is that if I have an argument with a colleague or we disagree on something or we have a discussion around something, you get a long way by actually assuming that the other person is going in at it with good intentions and they want to get to a good result as well. Whereas sometimes a lot of people are assuming that it's more about being right than actually achieving the goal. But I think if we assume that other people have the same good intentions that we have, we get a long way. I will put up a link to this research from Google after the session, and you can have a look at it. It helped me a lot because it was actually listing a number of behaviors. And by the end of the day, behaviors are what drives culture. Third question here. Psychological safety is a key element. To that, you need a new view of failure. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and it's about allowing people to fail. And then sometimes when you say that you should allow people to fail, well, does that mean that you don't care if people perform or not? No, it's the opposite. If you make a mistake, and if you're in my team and you make a mistake, that's absolutely fine. We'll pick it up and we go on. If you the next week make the same mistake again, okay, we probably start having a problem. If you the third week you make the same mistake for the third time, well, you might not be in the right place. So as long as people fail and learn, it's not a problem. If people fail and don't learn, that's a problem. So there's a distinction between allowing failure and being complacent about performance. That's not the same thing. I think that's important to remember. So, is there ever a conflict between setting appropriate boundaries and creating a psychologically safe culture, and how do you ensure this balance is correct? Depends on how you interpret appropriate boundaries, but I think that one of the things, again, about these behaviors that are important is that you have to always treat your colleagues with respect. And you actually have to, when you're in a dialogue, you actually have to listen to what the other person says, again, with good intent. Because if the only thing you're doing in the dialogue is thinking about how should I convince them, and you don't really hear people out, but you rather think about what am I going to answer them with when it's my turn to speak, you don't get a constructive dialogue. So again, it's about having a very open dialogue, but with a foundational respect for all people and their views. I'm not sure if that answered your question the way you posed it, but I hope it did. Effective methods for empowering employees at all levels to contribute to the innovation process. Wow, that's a big one. Thanks, Nina. Again, I think what you have to do is that you have to train and task all your managers throughout the organizations, from the highest level to the team leaders, that they are expected to be driving this within their teams. And they have to lead by example. I think that's the trick. So here's one from Anna. I've heard discussion on, even though your organization might be psychologically safe, you can still make an agreement on a safe place. For example, rules in a meeting that creates a safe place. Yes. Again, in order to create the kind of environment where people dare to speak up and dare to sort of take a stand without necessarily seeking conflict, but expressing a view, you have to feel safe enough so that you don't get outside of that meeting or outside of that discussion, that there's not a backlash to what you've said. And again, I think that comes back to the managers. They are the ones that have to lead by example, and they also have to be clear when somebody does not behave according to those agreements. So there's another one from Nilo. Speaking of, how do you make sure that you don't end up in a scarring at the first cut type of organization? In other words, For innovation, the bandwidth of being able to fail must be quite broad. Yeah, it's a balance. I think it's about as long as you see that people dare to take chances, they fail and they learn. I think the roof can be extremely high on what you're allowed to do. But if that translates into a culture of complacency, where people feel like, well, I don't need to perform, I can do whatever I want, because we have an innovative culture, or there's no boundaries. So I think that it has to be very clear that as long as you're failing and learning, you're trying, failing, learning, or you try and succeed, that's even better, of course. But you try, you fail, and you learn. As long as that's the mentality you're driving, I don't think you need to worry. But if it turns into complacency, there's a problem. And maybe it's not all about allowing failure or not, but also to create a culture where one have time to wonder about things, to learn and to practice wondering. Yes. I've been in organizations where we try to schedule innovation. That failed miserably. We had this, every last Friday of the month, everybody could work with any kind of project they wanted. It's really hard to schedule innovation. I think if you manage to create a culture that's psychologically safe and where people have high level of engagement, they will actually come up with ideas that make sense for your business. Because they care, if you manage to get there, they will care about the success of the business. Which means that when they are out running on a Wednesday evening, there will be a little thread in their mind going on about how could I improve the stuff that I'm doing at work, or when they are lying awake Sunday night, not with anxiety, but just because they lie awake, they might actually be thinking about things that matter for the organization they work for. So I think it's less about scheduling hours during office hours. I think it's more about creating a psychologically safe environment, and you couple that with high level of engagement. So I think I'm hitting the time limit here. It's almost 2:30. So unless there are any other questions popping up, I just want to say thank you to everybody that listened in. And I think it was a great discussion, and I'm really happy to see that so many of you sort of buy into and also have a relationship with the concept of psychological safety, which I think is critical for a successful, innovative organization. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day going forward.